The first thing Marla Ferris noticed about the house wasn't the price, though the price was absurd for a 4-bedroom colonial with a slate roof and original hardwood floors. It wasn't the wraparound porch either, or the oak tree in the backyard that the listing photos made look like something out of a postcard. It was the silence. She noticed it the moment she stepped through the front door for the first showing. A silence so complete that she could hear her own pulse in her ears, and she remembers thinking, in that strange offhand way, you think things that later turn out to matter, that a house this quiet had to be hiding something. She was wrong about what? She was not wrong that it was hiding. Marla was 34, recently divorced, and finishing a psychology dissertation on auditory processing disorders, which is a detail that will make sense later and that she did not think was relevant at the time. She'd been renting a cramped apartment above a bakery for 2 years, waking up every morning to the smell of proofing dough and the clatter of delivery trucks. And when her aunt passed and left her a modest inheritance, she did what a lot of people do when grief hands them money. She bought a house she couldn't quite justify in a town she'd never lived in, 3 hours from anyone she knew. The house was in Colby Hollow, a town of 1,100 people, tucked into a fold of hills where the cell service dropped in and out, and the nearest grocery store was a 20-minute drive. The realtor, a cheerful woman named Diane who wore too much perfume, mentioned almost in passing that the house had been vacant for 6 years before it came back on the market. When Marla asked why, Diane said something vague about an estate dispute between siblings, and changed the subject to the crown molding. If you're the kind of person who likes stories that sit with you long after they're over, stories that don't explain themselves too neatly, this is the moment to subscribe to Eerie Atmos X, because what happened in that basement over the following 3 weeks is something Marla has only told a handful of people, and something she still can't fully explain. Even now, the basement was the one part of the house Diane hadn't shown her on the first walkthrough. Just storage down there, nothing special, she'd said, waving a hand toward a door at the end of the kitchen hallway, and Marla, eager to see the master bedroom and the sunroom, hadn't pressed. It wasn't until her 3rd night in the house, after the movers had gone and the boxes sat unopened in the living room, that she even remembered the door existed. She was looking for the circuit breaker, because half the outlets in the kitchen had stopped working, and the door at the end of the hallway seemed like the only place it could be. The door itself was heavier than it looked, solid wood over what felt like a steel core, and it took her a moment to find the light switch inside. The bulb that came on was weak and yellow, hanging bare from a joist, and it lit maybe a third of the space before the light gave up entirely and let the rest dissolve into black. The basement was bigger than she expected, running the full footprint of the house, with a poured concrete floor that looked newer than the rest of the structure, and walls that were also concrete, smooth and unbroken. No exposed brick, no old fieldstone foundation, like she'd have expected in a house this old. She found the breaker box near the stairs, flipped the switch that had tripped, and started to head back up. That was when she noticed the sound, or rather the absence of it. Upstairs, even in the dead of night, there was always something. The house settling, leaned against the porch screens. The distant highway hum that never fully goes away, even in small towns. Down here, there was nothing. Not silence in the way a quiet room is silent, but a kind of pressure, like her ears were adjusting to altitude. She clapped her hands once just to test it, and the sound died almost instantly. No echo, no decay, just a flat clap and then nothing. As if the walls had reached out and taken the noise before it had a chance to travel. She stood there a moment longer than she meant to, feeling the strange dead air settle around her. and then she went back upstairs and didn't think much more about it that night, telling herself that old houses have old quirks, and this was simply a well-insulated basement. Nothing more. It took her 4 days to go back down. She had good reasons to put it off. Boxes to unpack, a dissertation chapter due to her advisor, a new town to learn the shape of, the one grocery store, the one diner, the neighbors 2 properties over who waved from their porch but never came closer. But she thought about the basement more than she wanted to admit. The way you think about a word on the tip of your tongue. And on the 5th night, unable to sleep, she went down again, this time with her phone flashlight and a folding chair, telling herself she was simply going to sit and get used to the space, because that's what her therapist, back before the divorce, used to tell her to do with things that unsettled her. Sit with the discomfort instead of running from it. She sat in the folding chair in the middle of the empty basement, the weak bulb throwing its small circle of light, and she noticed something she hadn't the first time. The silence wasn't uniform. If she turned her head slowly, there were points in the room, specific spots along the south wall, where the quality of the air seemed to shift almost imperceptibly, like standing near a running refrigerator you can't quite hear but can somehow feel. She stood and walked toward the wall, placing her palm flat against the cold concrete, and for just a second, so brief she almost convinced herself she'd imagined it, she felt something. Not a sound, a vibration, rhythmic, low, gone before she could be sure it had been there at all. She told herself it was pipes. Old houses have pipes, water hammer, pressure fluctuations, and there's nothing supernatural about a house making noise through its own plumbing. She went upstairs and slept, or tried to, and in the morning she called a plumber, a heavy-set, unhurried man named Gerald who'd lived in Colby Hollow his whole life. He walked the basement with her, tapped on walls, checked the utility hookups near the stairs, and told her plainly that there were no water lines running through that section of foundation. Whole basement's dry as a bone, he said. Somebody poured a lot of concrete down here at some point, more than you'd need for a foundation this size. When she asked him what he meant, he shrugged in the particular way people shrug when they know more than they're willing to say, and told her it wasn't his business, and that she should ask the county about the permit history if she was curious. She noticed, driving him back to his truck, that he glanced at the house twice in the rearview mirror before he pulled away, like he was checking it was still standing. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. More concrete than the foundation needed. She went online, searched property records, and found something strange. The basement's structural permit had been amended twice in the 80s, both times listed under a category the county clerk's digital system simply labeled miscellaneous reinforcement, with no further description, no inspector notes, nothing. It was the kind of dead end that would have made most people give up and move on with their lives. It made Marla more determined. If you're the kind of person who has ever felt a house watching you back, tell me in the comments, because that's exactly what it felt like standing at the top of those basement stairs, working up the nerve to go down for the 3rd time that week. She remembered, while packing for the move, that she still owned a stethoscope from an undergraduate research assistantship years earlier, one of the cheap acoustic kind used for basic auditory studies, buried in a box marked MISC grad school that she hadn't bothered to open since the move. She found it on a Tuesday night, dusted it off, and carried it down into the basement with a hand that was, she admits now, shaking slightly, though she told herself at the time it was only the cold. She started at the north wall, near the stairs, pressing the diaphragm flat against the concrete and listening. Nothing. she moved along. Section by section, the way she imagined a doctor might listen to a patient's back. Methodical, patient, professional, keeping her breathing slow so she wouldn't miss anything beneath her own pulse. Nothing, nothing, nothing. And then, near the southeast corner, where the wall met the floor at an angle that seemed subtly wrong, not quite square, she heard it dot. It wasn't loud. If anything, it was so faint that for a full 10 seconds she thought her mind was inventing it, the way tired ears invent phantom ringing in a silent room. But it didn't fade the way phantom sounds do. It held steady, and the longer she listened, the more clearly she could make out a pattern to it, a rhythm, low and even, 3 short pulses and a pause, 3 short pulses and a pause over and over, at a tempo too regular to be anything mechanical she could think of, and too organic somehow to be a machine at all. It sounded, she would say later, unable to find a better word for it, like chanting. Not words she could make out, not even clearly human. Just a cadence, a call and response rhythm buried somewhere on the other side of poured concrete that, according to every piece of paperwork she owned, had no cavity behind it at all. She sat back on her heels, stethoscope still in hand, and looked at the wall for a long time. Her academic brain, the part of her that had spent 3 years studying how the human ear processes ambiguous sound, tried to talk her down. Auditory pareidolia, she told herself. The brain's tendency to impose pattern on noise, the same phenomenon that makes people hear voices in white noise machines or messages in reversed music, pipes settling, groundwater moving through soil at a particular frequency that happened to sound rhythmic. She had studied the phenomenon herself. She had, in fact, written half a chapter about it. And yet when she pressed the stethoscope back against the wall a second time, the rhythm was still there, identical, unchanged, 3 pulses and a pause, and this time she thought, though she would never be fully certain, that the tempo shifted very slightly faster the longer she listened, as though something on the other side had noticed her listening back. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed with the bedroom door open, listening to a house that had gone back to its ordinary settling creaks, and told herself in the morning she would call someone, a contractor, an engineer, someone whose job it was to explain concrete in cavities and old construction quirks in terms that had nothing to do with rhythm or chanting or the unpleasant certainty that something on the other side of that wall was aware of her. The contractor she found, a structural specialist from 2 towns over named Owen Petricus, came out within the week, and he was the first person who didn't shrug off her questions. He walked the basement slowly, running a hand along the south wall the way you'd read a scar, and when she mentioned the 2 unexplained permit amendments from the 80s, his expression changed in a way she didn't like. He asked if he could bring a portable ground-penetrating radar unit back the following day. Said it plainly, professionally, but she noticed his hand wasn't quite steady when he wrote his number down for her. And she noticed he didn't want to go back down alone to grab a tool he'd left near the stairs, asking her to walk down with him instead, though he never explained why. The following afternoon, with the radar unit humming across the basement floor and up the south wall, Owen went quiet in a way that made Marla's stomach tighten before he'd said a word. The scan, he explained, showed a cavity behind the wall, roughly 4 feet deep, running the length of that section of foundation, filled with something that wasn't quite consistent with either air or solid rock, something the machine's software couldn't confidently classify. Could be old utility tunnel, he said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it. Some of these hill towns had root cellars, ice houses, that kind of thing, built way back before anybody kept good records. Sealed up later for insurance reasons. Maybe? He paused, looking at the readout again, and added almost to himself that the cavity's edges were unusually smooth for something abandoned that long ago, like it had been maintained rather than simply forgotten. That night, unable to leave it alone, Marla drove into what passed for downtown Colby Hollow and found the local historical society, little more than 2 rooms above the post office, staffed 3 afternoons a week by an elderly volunteer named Ruth, who had lived in the county her entire life. Ruth didn't need much prompting once Marla mentioned the address. Her expression didn't change exactly, but something behind her eyes went careful, guarded, and she disappeared into a back room for several minutes before returning with a thin folder of yellowed newspaper clippings. The house, it turned out, had been built in the 1890s by a family named Corliss, prominent in the town for 2 generations before quietly falling out of local memory sometime in the mid-20th century. Ruth's clippings were fragmentary, more rumor than record, but a pattern emerged even in the gaps. References to a private gathering the Corliss family hosted in their basement each winter, described in one clipping only as the observance attended by invited guests from neighboring towns, an event locals apparently learned not to ask too many questions about after 2 young men who'd gone to investigate one winter back in 1927 never returned home, and the matter was quietly closed by the county sheriff at the time without much explanation given to the families. Ruth mentioned, almost reluctantly, that her own grandmother used to say you could sometimes hear something from that house on the coldest nights of the year, carried on the wind down the hollow, though she'd always assumed as a girl that it was simply wind through the trees. Marla thanked her and drove home in a kind of numb quiet, replaying the phrase, the observance, over and over. And it wasn't until she pulled into her own driveway, headlights sweeping across the dark windows of the house, that she let herself fully consider the possibility that whatever the Corliss family had been doing in that basement more than a century ago hadn't stopped when the family did. If a house could keep a secret for 100 years, waiting, patient, quiet the way Marla's basement was quiet, what do you think it would do the moment someone finally started listening back? I'd genuinely like to know what you'd have done in her position, so tell me in the comments below, because Marla still isn't sure she made the right choice. She should have left. She knows that now, and she knew it somewhere in the back of her mind even then. But leaving would have meant admitting that a piece of poured concrete and a strange rhythm heard through a stethoscope had beaten her, had made her give up a house, a town, a fresh start she badly needed after the divorce, and some stubborn part of her wasn't ready to let it win that easily. Instead, she did something she still can't fully account for. She went back down to the basement one more time, alone near midnight, carrying nothing but the stethoscope and a small digital recorder she'd bought that afternoon at the only electronics counter in town, determined to capture proof of what she was hearing, something she could bring to an actual acoustics lab, something that would let her explain this away with data instead of dread. The basement felt different that night, though she couldn't have said exactly how, only that the temperature seemed to drop the moment she reached the bottom of the stairs. A cold that had nothing to do with the season, since it was still early autumn and mild outside. She pressed the stethoscope to the southeast wall and pressed record on the little device clipped to her collar. And this time the rhythm came almost immediately. No searching required, as though it had been waiting for her. 3 pulses and a pause. 3 pulses and a pause, steady as a heartbeat, And then, for the first time, something changed. The pause between pulses shortened. Not gradually. All at once, like a held breath finally released, and the rhythm sped into something that no longer sounded like chanting at all, but like urgency, like a signal, and beneath it, so faint she would spend weeks afterward convincing herself she hadn't imagined it. She thought she heard something that resembled a voice. Not words exactly, but the shape of words. The cadence of someone speaking directly against the other side of the wall. Close enough that if the concrete hadn't been there at all, she would have felt breath on her ear. She dropped the stethoscope. She doesn't remember deciding to. Her hand simply opened, and the device swung on its cord and struck the concrete with a small, flat clatter that should have echoed, and didn't, swallowed instantly by that same dead, pressurized silence she'd noticed her very first night in the house. She stood frozen for what felt like a full minute, staring at the wall, telling herself to move, and it was the small red light of the digital recorder, still faithfully blinking on her collar, that finally broke the spell and sent her stumbling back up the stairs 2 at a time, slamming the basement door behind her, and standing in the kitchen in the dark, breathing hard, both hands braced on the counter, waiting for a sound that never came, because the door, like everything else about that basement, seemed to swallow whatever was on the other side of it completely. She didn't sleep in the house that night. She sat in her car in the driveway with the doors locked until the sky started to lighten. And in the morning, in the flat gray light of an ordinary Colby Hollow dawn, she made herself go back inside and play the recording, sitting at her kitchen table with headphones on, half convinced the whole thing would sound like nothing at all, like static and imagination, and a long few weeks of stress finally catching up to her. It did not sound like nothing. Under the hiss of the cheap recorder's built-in microphone, faint but unmistakable once she isolated it, was the rhythm exactly as she remembered it. And beneath that, layered so subtly she had to raise the volume nearly to its limit to catch it, was something that made the hair on her arms rise before her conscious mind had even finished processing what she was hearing. A second rhythm, slower, deeper, running underneath the first, like a second heartbeat out of sync with the one above it, as though there wasn't one thing behind that wall keeping time in the dark, but at least 2, and they were not. She realized with a cold certainty that settled into her chest and stayed there, keeping the same rhythm at all. They were responding to each other. She called Owen Petricus first. Then, when he didn't answer, she called the county building inspector's office. And then, growing desperate, she even called the sheriff's non-emergency line, though she couldn't quite bring herself to explain over the phone what exactly she wanted them to come investigate. A deputy did eventually come out that afternoon, a young man clearly unfamiliar with the house's history, who walked to the basement with her, listened politely, tapped the wall himself a few times, heard nothing because the rhythm, she would learn, did not appear on command, and left with a gentle suggestion that she consider having the house's ventilation system checked, since old houses sometimes produced strange resonant sounds through ductwork that could be mistaken for something more unusual. He was kind about it. He clearly didn't believe a word of what she'd told him, and she couldn't entirely blame him, since if their positions had been reversed, she isn't sure she would have believed it either, not until she'd heard it herself, felt it in her own palm pressed flat against cold concrete that should have held nothing at all. Owen called back the next day, and when she played him a portion of the recording over the phone, there was a long silence on his end before he spoke again, and when he did, his voice had lost the confident, professional cadence from their first meeting. He told her, carefully, that he thought she should consider not going back down there again, at least not alone, and when she pressed him on why, he admitted reluctantly that he'd looked further into the county's amended permits after their visit and found a name attached to the 1980s reinforcement work that matched a contractor who'd done similar, unexplained concrete work on 2 other properties in the region, both of which, according to public tax records, had also stood vacant for years at a stretch before being sold, and both of which, he added, quieter now, had also once belonged generations back to families with some documented connection to the old Corliss household. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't the kind of story that wraps up with a neat explanation. And if that's the kind of horror you enjoy, the kind that lingers instead of resolves, share this one with someone who'd appreciate a story like that. Because what Marla decided to do next is the part she still has the hardest time explaining, even to herself. She did not sell the house. She did not call in an exorcist or a priest or anyone from outside the narrow, practical world she'd built her entire academic career on. Instead, in the weeks that followed, she did the one thing her training had prepared her to do better than anyone else who'd walked through that basement. She listened, carefully, methodically, night after night, mapping the rhythm's changes against a small notebook, tracking when it sped and slowed, when the second, deeper pulse joined the first, and when it fell silent, building what she told herself was research and what anyone watching from the outside would have called something closer to obsession. She noticed patterns. The rhythm was strongest on cold, windless nights. It was nearly imperceptible during storms, as though something about barometric pressure muffled it, the way pressure muffles sound in deep water. And on 3 separate occasions, always past midnight, always when she was alone in the basement with the stethoscope pressed to that same southeast corner, the rhythm paused entirely for exactly 4 seconds, and then resumed at a tempo that matched, precisely, unmistakably, the rhythm of her own racing heartbeat, as though whatever kept time behind that wall had simply been waiting, patiently, for hers to synchronize with it on its own. She still lives in that house. She has not, in the 2 years since, found anyone willing to break through the wall to see what's actually there. Not a contractor, not an engineer, not even Owen, who stopped returning her calls entirely after their 3rd conversation, and whose number, when she tried it again months later, had been disconnected. She has stopped trying to explain it to people who ask, because the explanation never lands the way the experience did, and because some quiet, stubborn part of her has come to believe that whatever is behind that wall isn't interested in getting out. Exactly so much as it is interested in being heard, in having someone finally, after 100 years of silence, listen back. She keeps the stethoscope in a kitchen drawer now, and most nights she doesn't touch it at all. But some nights when the wind drops and the hollow goes still the way it only does a handful of times a year, she finds herself standing at the top of the basement stairs anyway, hand resting on the doorframe, listening for a rhythm she has never once, in 2 years, been able to convince herself she imagined, and wondering the way you wonder about a phone ringing in another room, whether tonight is the night it finally answers back,